June 23, 1944. Before dawn on a bamboo ridge north of Mogong, Burma, the jungle sweats and listens as warm rain ticks on palm fronds and rotting leaves. The night pretends to be safe. A Japanese outpost lies in a ring of cut fern and bamboo stakes. A Type 96 light machine gun propped on a log. Rifles stacked muzzle, down near packs that smell of damp canvas and fish paste. Routine breeds confidence. They whisper about rations and letters, boots off to dry, helmets inverted to catch the drizzle, a sentry's bayonet glinting like a wet needle in the last of the night. They think the jungle is theirs. On the slope below, bare feet and silent webbing slide through creepers and torch ginger, the smell of crushed leaf rising around men who do not stumble on roots they cannot see. Silence has a direction. They are 3rd Battalion, 6th Gurkha Rifles, Chendits under Brigadier Mike Calvert, moving to pinch the approaches to Mogong while the monsoon drums time on the canopy. A reputation moves with them. Each man carries a short, forward, curved blade in a black scabbard pressed to his hip, 12 to 15 inches of thick, bellied steel whose weight lies forward of the hand. The kukri is a tool that becomes a verdict. A hand touches a shoulder, 2 fingers point, a breath hisses. Ayo Gurkhali is still a promise kept quiet, and the file splits into pairs that taste the path with fingertips before toes follow. The hunt begins without a sound. A leech crawls across a knuckle and is flicked away. A wire news is found by feel and lifted with the tip of a bayonet. A man kneels and smears more mud on his cheek, where the rain has washed it clean. Every sense becomes an instrument. At the sentry line, a shape resolves into a human outline under a poncho, the Arisaka's sling looped over the wrist. Breath a slow thread between parted lips. He is the first to learn. The kukri clears its scabbard in a single, practiced pull, no ring or scrape. Just the softer sound of leather death and the quick grip of a hand that knows edges. One motion ends a watch. Better to die than live a coward. Kaya Hunu Banda Manu Ramro, lives without a voice in the crouched shapes that flow past, counting heartbeats, not yards. Mottos turn into muscle memory. Further in, a Japanese corporal rolls to his elbow as a branch snaps, eyes squinting into leaves, finger-teasing the safety of the Type 96 as if it's a question that can be asked gently. The answer is already given. 2 shadows hit the weapon pit as one. 1 blade and 1 boot, the magazine popping free into wet ferns as the crew gurgles in surprise, that never gets to form a word. Close work finishes quicker than fear can start. Across the perimeter the timing is a metronome. 2 heartbeats, then a thud, 3 paces, another breath, the nick of canvas, a dull clack as a helmet rolls into bamboo. Disbelief arrives too late. This is not a raid for noise. It is the removal of sentries, the opening of a gate, the turning of an L-shaped ambush onto men who believe their own doctrine about jungle nights. Control unfolds without drama. A Japanese runner lurches from a lean to clutching a message pad, sees a shape in the low light, and draws steel with a hiss that meets a thicker sound and stops. Reflex loses to practice. On the far flank, a Bren team settles behind a rotting log. Gunners cheek to wood, sights aimed at the black triangle of a machine, gun nest that still thinks it commands a clearing. Fire will come only when it has to. The first shot in this contact is delayed until the last a grenade rolled under a bench. A flash muffled by cloth, a spurt of sparks like fireflies, and then the jungle inhales their smoke. Sound is rationed like ammunition, with complete disregard for his own safety. The official language will later say of another Gurkha action, on this same day near Mogong, but the phrase fits the men whose blades were asked to keep a promise before the rifles spoke. Bureaucratic words can't hold breath and reign. The perimeter collapses inward in inches, not yards, until one man finally shouts. The machine gun stutters, and the Bren answers from the log with a flat crack that tears the last threads of sleep for miles. Silence ends on purpose. In the confusion, a stocky figure clambers onto a firing step, kukri dark with sap and something heavier, and he does not shout a war cry because this is still work, not glory. Efficiency takes its due. Around Mogong the Chendits close a ring, and across the river the Japanese map shows a blank where an outpost used to be. A small erasure made with steel, and the discipline of men who had been told they could not surprise masters of the jungle. Assumptions are the first casualties. In a few hours the monsoon will make footprints disappear and wash blades clean, and the only evidence will be the absence of gunfire where a machine gun should have lifted its voice at dawn. Safety has melted into rain. By 1942, the Japanese 15th Army had written its Burma gospel in confident strokes. Night infiltration, all-round islands, of resistance, and the belief that the jungle itself was an ally that blinded and smothered outsiders. Assurance lived in the leaves. Their platoons dug spider holes in bamboo thickets, wired L-shaped ambushes around clearings, and sighted Type 96 light machine guns to rake predictable paths, while Type 89 grenade dischargers, knee mortars, arched explosives through foliage. Technique fed pride. British and Indian formations had already paid for ignorance in Arakan and on the Sitang, retreating to India with malaria leeches and a reputation for fearing the green. Pain taught quickly. General William Slim rebuilt the 14th Army around the opposite idea. The jungle is neutral, he told his men, turning terrain from monster to medium by training, diet, discipline, and small unit drills that worked in rain and dark. Myth was replaced by method. While he forged corps for set-piece battles at Imphal and Kohima, a separate experiment knifed behind the Japanese front, awed Wingate's long-range penetration force. The Chindits, supplied by air and built to raid railways, strongpoints, and confidence. A new tool entered the kit. Operation Thursday began in March 1944 with gliders and Dakotas clawing into makeshift strips called Broadway and Charinghi, mules and radio sets slithering onto jungle floors under prop wash and tracer. Audacity made its own runway. Among the brigades dropped north of the Irrawaddy was the 77th Indian Infantry Brigade under Brigadier Michael, Mad Mike Calvert, 1st King's Liverpool, 1st Lancashire Fusiliers and 3rd Battalion 6th Gurkha Rifles, organised into lean columns that moved by compass, not road. Purpose rode light. Air supply turned columns into enduring thorns. Dakotas droned in with 303 grenades, rations and medical chests while wounded went out. Japanese columns found their rear areas suddenly full of enemies who did not need roads. The map grew porous. In May-June 1944, Stilwell's offensive toward Maidkina strained, and the Chindits were tasked to help by cutting the Mogong-Gao-Kamaying axis that fed the Japanese hold on northern Burma's rail and river. Net. Pressure demanded sacrifice. Mogong mattered because it sat astride the artery west of Maidkina. Take it, and barges, packed trains, and foot columns would bleed distance and days, loosening the grip on the airfield city the Allies could not bypass. Geography wrote the stakes. Calvert drove his exhausted brigade toward the town's ring of bunkers and ditches while the monsoon soaked maps and men alike, accepting a slog he had not planned in order to keep a larger plan alive. Obligation overruled exhaustion. Opposite them, Japanese garrisons believed the wet would dull blades and blind attackers, their fieldcraft reinforced by years of winning night fights and ambushes under teak and bamboo. Confidence leaned on history. The Gurkhas brought a different grammar to that darkness. Soft-soled boots, Bren guns hunched under capes, stens wrapped against rain, and at each man's waist a kukri whose leaf-shaped blade had felled brush, branches, and, when needed, sentries. Utility doubled as menace. Better to die than live a coward. Kaya Hunu Bandamanu Ramro was not shouted so much as carried. Visible in the calm way, a section leader tapped a shoulder and split his men to feel along a ditch by touch. Courage stayed quiet. Calvert's battalion logs describe a fight of low crawls and short rushes, of grenade duels across 10 yards and Bren bursts that lasted seconds. Not minutes. To keep barrels dry and positions unregistered by sound, economy became survival, on 11 and again on the 23rd of June. Lieutenant Michael Almand of 306 Gurkhas led charges through waist, deep water to knock out machining guns blocking approaches to bridges, an action that would earn him the Victoria Cross and cost him his life. Leadership paid in blood. That same 23rd of June, Rifleman Tol Bahadur Pun, 3006 Gurkhas, when his section was pinned and its Bren crew down, with complete disregard for his own safety, ran 30 yards under fire, seized the Bren, and assaulted a bunker alone, a citation line that reads like a heartbeat, forced to sprint. Individual will changed angles. Japanese company diaries from this period speak of enemy infiltration at night and silent knife attacks, a grudging acknowledgement that the jungle no longer whispered only in one language. Respect edged out certainty. The weapons facing off were intimate. Type 38 and Type 99 Arisakis with long blades, Brens steady on fallen logs, no. 36 grenades lobbed in arcs you could calculate by muscle memory, and Kukris whose weight forward made the first cut decisive. Closeness made fear real. Air hummed above it all, C-47s dropped panniers through cloud, and Stinson El Laufayez lifted wounded off paddies as the rain drummed, letting a light infantry force do what doctrine said was impossible for weeks on end. Endurance had wings. When at last the perimeter lines around Mogong faltered, Calvert signalled the terse pride of a commander who had walked every yard. "I claim we have taken Mogong." A sentence became a banner. The Japanese had trusted distance, jungle, and habit to keep them safe. The Gurkhas brought proximity, discipline, and a blade that asked for silence and gave it back. Assumptions were now targets. The jungle kit of a Gurkha rifleman in 1944 was a compact system 1937 pattern webbing tight to the body, 2 bandoliers of 303. A water bottle under a Hessian cover, a Bren team within whispering distance, and at the right hip a forward, bellied blade. The essentials were quiet and close. The kukri itself measured often between 12 and 15 inches of leaf, shaped steel with a thick spine and a weight biased toward the tip, a notch at the base near the hilt, and a wooden grip that locked into the palm without fuss. It cut, then decided. It was a farmer's knife that became doctrine. Clearing bamboo, breaking brushwood, dressing rations, and, when sentries stood between a column and its objective, finishing a job faster than a bolt could be cycled. Utility turned to lethality. Firepower lived a few paces behind the blade the Bren light machine gun, 303 British, 30i round top magazine, quick change barrel, and a readable rhythm around 500 rounds per minute that stitched foliage into submission without wasting breath. Its voice was authority. Sections moved around that sound. 8 to 10 men, a Bren group and a rifle group. Each man drilled to feed the gun, and shut it down the moment the lane was cleared so the jungle didn't record a position by echo. Discipline saved lives. Stenmk submachine guns lay under capes against rain 9x19 mum, 32i round single-feed magazines, roughly 500 rpm cyclic. Cheap and ugly but perfect for a 5-yard argument, where mud and vines made sights into rumours. Imperfect tools do perfect work up close. Grenades were the punctuation, nung. 36 mils with their heavy, reliable shatter, and riflemen counting seconds in their heads before the underhand roll into a bamboo firing bay. Timing bled into instinct. A 2-inch mortar team kept smoke and HE for lanes and break-ins. The little 5 mammoth tube light enough to carry and fast enough to answer when a Type 96 nest had found its rhythm. Angles could be bought with smoke. The Japanese outposts were their own machine. Arisaka Type 38 rifles in 6.5 and 15 hours and Type 99s in 7.7 hours and 15 emelet, long blades fixed and oiled, and a belief that bayonet spirit, Saishin, would thrive where the canopy pressed out fear. Confidence wore steel. Their light machine gun, 6.5 mm later Type 99 Ty 7.7 mm top-fed 30i round box bipod, around 550 to 600 another PM, accurate and agile in a pit cut chest deep into red soil. It owned clearings until someone took them away. Most feared by men crossing 10 yards of wet earth was the Type 89 grenade discharger. The knee mortar, a 5.2V meloded tube at roughly 4.7 kilograms that could drop a bomb into a foxhole or behind a log with a range the hand could not match. It made cover feel thin. Japanese perimeter doctrine in Burma built islands. 360-degree pits linked by fire lanes, tripwires to grenades, and L5-shaped ambushes around paths where a British section would be forced to show silhouettes between trunks. Geometry guarded sleep. Night belonged to infiltration. Pairs of men crawling with bayonets sheathed, listening rather than looking, slipping past forward posts to cut telephone lines and map artillery flashes the way a hunter reads hoofprints. Patience became a tactic. The Chindit grammar inverted the page. Columns of 300-400 broken into sub-columns, each with Bren, Sten, 2-inch mortar. Signallers carrying wireless sets No. 18 and No. 22, and a handful of men who could make air and ground meet at a clearing with a panel. Air turned isolation into endurance. Dakotas, C-47s, brought in panniers, tagged for Cody, named drops like Broadway and Choringhi, with coloured smoke on the ground to mark wind and position, and mules took the weight forward on Indian pack saddles, where wheels could not go. Supply learned to flow through leaves. Wingate's long-range penetration doctrine was simple and harsh. Insert by air. Dig in on the enemy's lines of communication, raid rails and roadheads, hold by air supply, and shift camp before the counter-punch arrived. Presence was a weapon. Slim's line. The jungle is neutral. Shaped the training that held it together diet. Adapted to rice and tea, boots reshaped to softer soles for creep and grip, and navigation done by prismatic compass and counting paces, rather than trusting paths the enemy surveyed. Belief became behaviour. Against this, Japanese fieldcraft remained formidable. Sentries rotated on the minute, latrines sighted for surprise, kit waterproofed in oilskin, and rations geared to rice and dried fish that could be portioned cold. Experience gave them edges, but the British and Indian battalions learned to make silence a system. Muzzle covers against rain, actions checked by feel, bolt heads cushioned with strips of rubber, and sling swivels taped so metal would not betray muscle. Noise was treated like light. When the rifles had to speak, the Bren led, with riflemen firing single shots on iron sights blackened with soot to kill the glare. Stens held low for the last few yards, and the 2-inch mortar lifting smoke like a curtain call for a rush. Contact became a drill. Japanese bunkers answered with Type 96, Chato and Arisaka bolts, sawed back by hands memorized to the grain of their stocks. Knee mortars thumping a slow heartbeat that made men in ditches count their breaths between bombs. Pressure made minutes long. The Kukris threaded it all together because its engineering matched the ground. A blade that worked around vines instead of against them, that did not reflect light when kept oiled and dirty, and that required no noise before its first use. It was the right tool in the wrong place for anyone else. Doctrine on both sides met at arm's length. One culture that revered the bayonet as a moral proof. another that trusted a farmer's knife to finish a sentence started by a bren. Belief met physics. Between Mogong's ditches and Broadway's clearings, the machine was not metal alone but a choreography, signals, blades, light automatics, short mortars, and the patience to let silence do most of the killing. The jungle rewarded the system that moved softly. June 23, 1944. Monsoon light seeps into the rice paddies outside Mogong as mist clings to the railway embankment, and the pagoda spire fades in and out like a lighthouse in rain. The jungle's promise of safety is about to fail. Japanese positions stud the ditches. Type 96 sighted to rake the buns, knee mortars prey ranged on the paddies, and rifles nested in firing bays cut into red soil beneath palm mats. They believe routine is armor. Gurkha scouts come in at a crouch, bare feet whispering in water, Kukris quiet at the hip, while the Bren group finds a rotting log and paints a lane in their minds before any metal moves. Silence loads first. A sentry half turns at a faint shift in the rain, sees a darker shape where a shadow should be, and the black curve clears leather with a sound too soft to warn anyone else. The first certainty dies without a cry. In the seconds that follow, pairs slide through the wire gaps they cut with fingertips and patience, hands finding stock and sling and pushing them aside like vines so men, not weapons, fall first. Confidence starts to leak. Then the stillness breaks. 2 Bren bursts snap the clearing flat, a 2-inch mortar plops smoke into a trench corner, and a section leader points with 2 fingers toward a machining gun nest that must be the next thing to cease existing. Work begins in earnest. On the right, a young lieutenant limps through waist-deep water, sten held high, the wound from an earlier day leaking thin pink into the paddy as he leads his platoon across a fire lane that should have stopped them. He refuses the shape of fear. His citation will catch the moment in official steel, with complete disregard for his own safety. Lieutenant Michael Almand, 306 Gurkha rifles, led the attack and captured the enemy machining gun post, and when the next nest spat back he rose again and closed. Pros cannot show the mud on his hands. The Japanese crew on the embankment throws a grenade blind, a dull thump that punches breath from chests, and then their gun chatters until a Bren pins it to the bank and a shadow takes the last 3 yards with steel and a knee. Flesh outruns fire. Another lane stalls under a house-mounted gun that rips the water into white streaks, cutting men down in pairs until the section's heart misfires and the advance is a crawl that goes nowhere. A platoon meets a wall. On that flank, a stocky rifleman drags himself up, blood and rain patterning his tunic, and without waiting for words he scoops up the warm Bren from a dead friend and stands into the scythe. He makes his own order. The London Gazette will say it clean and spare. Without waiting for orders, he seized a Bren gun, and firing from the hip, he rushed forward alone, across open ground, over a stream and up a steep slope. The sentence carries the weight of a life. Rifleman Tol Bahadur Pun crosses 30 yards that feel like a country, traces stitched around him like a net, and keeps walking as if the fire belongs to someone else, until the Bren's cone of heat folds the enemy gun, and the men behind it. Will becomes a weapon. He lobs a grenade through the doorway, steps in, and turns the captured gun on the next position so his platoon can rise and follow the gap his stubbornness has torn. One spine stiffens 20. Fewer na call. A Japanese NCO hisses, "Hold fire," then loses the moment as another kukri cuts the last sentry and a smoke round drops into the pit like a falling moon. Control slips a handhold in the radio net. Clipped voices weave through static and rain. White smoke correct, lift left moving. While the Bren drums a metronome that keeps fear from dictating the pace of feet in water. Discipline holds the line. The knee mortars thump, and the air fills, with deadly umbrellas that punch into the paddy. And for a minute everything pauses under the drip of shrapnel and leaves. Time dilates around impact. Ulmand goes forward again, refusing the stretcher that keeps finding him, and his platoon follows the thin line carved by a man who's already given more than a body can barter. Leadership walks first. Behind the embankment, a Japanese corporal scrabbles in the sticky mud for a fresh drum. Hears a low call he doesn't understand, Ayo Gorkali, and then the world becomes close, wet, and edged. Psychology breaks before steel. Calvert's men bite deeper until the net tightens, and in a command post, where the rain makes pools on a map board, a brigadier sends a message he has earned the right to write. I claim we have taken Mogong. A pride speaks without ornament. By afternoon the embankment is a slumped line of sandbags and cut bamboo, the paddies popped and silenced, and the last shots are single angry reports from men who thought the monsoon made them untouchable. Belief lies face down in water. The roll call is thin, the stretcher line long, and the rain does what rain always does, erasing footprints while memories are still forming under helmets. Victory exacts its price. For the garrison that thought the jungle would keep them safe, the lesson is carved in the economy of inches, and the sound of a blade whose first use is also its last. Arrogance meets reality and bleeds. Word of Mogong ran ahead of the monsoon. Japanese companies doubled sentries, strung tins on tripwires, and pre-registered knee mortar arcs where silent men might come. The jungle no longer felt partisan. British Indian units answered with refinements. Softer-soled boots, taped metal, blackened sights, and the new No. 5 Menki, jungle carbine, to trim weight and flash as patrols stretched farther from tracks and light. Tools learned the terrain. Air stitched endurance into the weave. Dakotas dropping panniers by code. Stinson LL5s and L1s lifting casualties from hacked clearings, and supply officers timing columns to the drone overhead like farmers read rain. Isolation lost its teeth. The Kukris remained the last argument, but the choreography around it grew tighter. Bren groups rehearsed 5-second bursts. Sten gunners learned to push through smoke, and section leaders drilled the hand-tap language that made motion faster than speech. Silence became doctrine. Across the Imphal Plain and the Kohima Ridge lines through spring and summer 1944. The Japanese, you go. Offensive bled itself against all-round boxes and counter-patrols that refused to sleep. Banzai charges dwindled into infiltration and flameless duels in elephant grass. Momentum slowed into attrition. One adaptation came heavy and ugly. Pikes bumping against hips, Spring launched 8 bombs tuned to punch wood and steel alike. And in June 1944, Rifleman Ganju Loma of 7th Gurkha Rifles, already wounded, stalked forward and destroyed 3 tanks near Ningthokong. Precision joined audacity. Another came as a human decision repeated under fire. Naik Agan Singh Rai of 5th Royal Gurkha Rifles at Bisenpur, 26th June, led 2 platoons across open ground, knocked out 2 light machining gun posts, and steadied a position that should have gone. Leadership rewired outcomes. Official language could barely contain what it described. The London Gazette printing citations with the cool refrain. With complete disregard for his own safety, for men whose choices turned the balance at trench corners, where every inch was priced. Paper could not carry breath. Slim's training pamphlets were quoted like catechism. The jungle is neutral, and by late 1944 the 14th Army moved as if that were a law of physics. Finding routes where maps were blank and timing advances to the hour, a knee mortar team shifted position. Belief hardened into habit. Japanese perimeter art evolved too. Listening posts pushed out on bamboo mats, alternate pits dug into roots. and bayonets kept sheathed for silence until the last breath before the rush. Experience learned humility. Captured company orders from the period speak to that edgy. Double the night watch. No calling out. Knife men probable. A grudging acknowledgement that close work now belonged to both sides. Respect arrived without ceremony. The British lightened and sharpened. No. 5 carbines with flash hiders kicked like mules and flashed less under the leaves. 2-inch mortars carried more smoke and fewer bombs, and Vickers guns were hauled piece by piece to hold perimeters that had to live until dawn. Weight shifted to need. In the north, the Chindits burned themselves down holding rail and road. Calvert's brigade took Mogong at ruinous cost, and Wingate was gone. Killed in an air crash in March, yet the technique they proved bled into the wider army air kept teeth sharp, and small units moved like shadows. Innovation outlived the unit patch. Rumour moved along both fronts in the way that war spreads folklore. Japanese diaries noted, night knives, and silent men, while British patrol reports grudgingly praised enemy camouflage that turned a man into a root until he decided not to be. Fear learned 2 accents. On the Irrawaddy in early 1945, as the advance rolled south, a scarred private named Lakhiman Gorung of 4th Gurkha Rifles faced grenades dropping into his trench at Tongdor. He threw 2 back. The third took his right hand, and he kept firing his 303 left-handed for 4 hours to stop 50 men. Endurance became a weapon. By then the kukri was less a myth than a method. The last few yards answered by a blade that did not misfire, paired with a drill that made the first minute of contact the most important 60 seconds in a small war. Finality lived at arm's length. Japanese counter-patrols adapted in kind, striking ration drops, stalking stretcher parties, and slipping wire through elephant grass to shape lanes a Bren could not quite see until it was too late. Stalkers met stalkers. But the air bridge would not break, and the rifles kept evolving. More radios at platoon, more smoke at hand, more P-80 bombs stacked under capes, and more men who could aim by feel in rain dark enough to confuse the moon. Capacity crowded doubt out. Across hills with names few maps had printed, the balance tipped. Not all at once, but in the repeated, disciplined decision to make the jungle honesty to close by choice, to fire exactly, to finish quietly, and to leave by routes no one else could read. Adaptation bred dread. By the time the columns reached the river towns and the pagoda spires, Japanese soldiers who once assumed the night was theirs had learned to listen for an absence. The missing scrape, the missing cough, just before a wet curve of steel rewrote the next few heartbeats. The jungle had chosen neutrality, and the Gurkhas taught it a new silence. February 1945. Irrawaddy dawn breathes mist along the bends at Nyongu and Myingmu as assault boats nose off mud banks and engineers whisper across rafts with ropes burned smooth by wet hands. The river ceases to be a moat. Overhead the drone is constant. Dakota's hurricanes. And Spitfires etching grey lanes above green, while signallers snap panels to the wind and smoke curls, to mark drop zones that will feed the bridgeheads. The sky belongs to them. Gurkha platoons slip over buns to seize the far bank foxholes. Bren teams flatten behind termite mounds, and Pi-8 men hunker in elephant grass counting heartbeats between knee mortar thumps. The first hour buys a day. Slim's 14th Army crosses in echelons, 7th and 20th Indian Divisions securing Pokoku Nyongu, 19th Indian Division pushing toward Mandalay, and 17th Indian Division turning south with the 255th Indian Tank Brigade toward Meiktila. A plan becomes momentum. Keep the pressure. Keep the silence. Section leaders murmur as Sten gunners ghost through smoke to finish corners while the kukri, last to leave its scabbard, writes the period at the end of a sentence. Close work makes certainty. On the 3 March, Makehtilla falls by Coupe de Main. The Black Cats of 17th Division kick in the gates, cut the rail and road hub, and hold an air-supplied island while Japanese formations counterattack from every compass point. A city becomes a fortress. Dakotas slide in under weather and out through tracer, landing and lifting on strips carved from scrub, feeding ammunition, water, and sacks of rice while Stinsons flirt with bent palm tops to whisk the worst wounds away. Air turns risk into reach. Japanese regiments rush the perimeter at dusk and dawn, Type 99s and Type 96 spitting from slit trenches, knee mortars dropping bombs like slow hail, and bayonets glinting through smoke. Spirit meets system. Gurkha companies answer by the drill. 5-second Bren bursts, a 2-inch mortar's quick smoke, then the last 20 yards under steel whose forward weight doesn't need light or permission to finish. Economy becomes terror. The numbers begin to overwhelm. Dozens of Allied battalions on converging axes, hundreds of sorties a day, road columns of trucks and carriers, queued by the mile from Pork-to-Pine Manor, and artillery that speaks in salvos instead of single voices. Scale crushes habit. Mandalay Hill falls to 19th Indian Division on the 25th March after days of cave-to-cave fighting. The fort and palace wreathed in dust, while the Irrawaddy bridges burn behind retreating columns that used to own the night. Landmarks change owners. Enemy strongpoint cleared. Platoon reduced by half. A battalion log notes without adjectives as Gurkha sections clean bunkers in alleys where pagoda bells hang crooked, and the air tastes of limewash and cordite. The ledger balances in blood. From Makettilla's Air Island, columns fan out to shred the Japanese order of march. Roadblocks at mileposts. Ambushes inside Teak Shadow captured 7.7 Dolnulliu nav guns turned back onto their owners as traffic notes are written in tracer. Operations become pursuit. April drags heat across the plains as IV Corps drives for the Sitang and checks XX True Corps for the Piguyomas, cutting an army into packets that bleed in ditches while their radios falter into static and wind. Organization loses cohesion. On the 2nd of May, Operation Dracula drops its net. 26th Indian Division lands by sea on the Rangoon foreshore while airborne sticks mark the city's gates and oil tanks burn as if to greet them. A capital changes tense. By 3 May Allied troops enter Rangoon streets that echo with their own boots, the Japanese having withdrawn through jungle tracks south and east, and the rains arrive like a curtain on a stage already struck. The campaign has turned irrevocably. Statistics harden the mood. Entire Japanese divisions reduced to cadres, thousands of prisoners, and a line of abandoned guns that curves down Strand Road like a rusting thesis on misjudged terrain. Data becomes judgment, but the ledger carries the other column. 3/6 Gurkha as a whisper of its former strength after Mogong, Olmand dead of wounds. Tul Bahadur Pun alive and grim with a ribbon that weighs almost nothing, and stretcher parties that march as far as fighters. Dominance collects a toll. Slim writes orders over a map damp with monsoon. Corps commanders trade objectives like chess pieces, and West African divisions step into the green with machetes that do the same work as any curved blade in the last 10 yards. Mastery spreads by method. Japanese survivors leave notebooks that mention enemy infiltration at night and knife attacks, without emphasis, as if naming the fact removes its sting. In truth, every sentry now looks twice into leaves before he breathes out. Fear learns new habits. By summer, patrols from the Irrawaddy to the Sitang move, with a confidence that's quiet rather than loud, the Bren's rhythm and the Kukris silence weighing equally in plans that don't waste a minute or a man's breath. The jungle has been made neutral, and in that neutral jungle, where safety once felt like a canopy, the final lesson stands in puddles and shell holes, and the wet gleam of a curved blade that never needed to announce itself to own the last few feet. The silence now belongs to them. The 14th Army's victory in Burma was forged far from the firing steps, at docks, depots, workshops, and airstrips that stitched a continent to the jungle. The avalanche began as a timetable. Calcutta and Chittagong took in mountains of crates. 303 rounds, radio spares, Bailey Bridge panels, storm boats, rations, and pushed them up the Assam-Bengal Railway toward Dimapur and Lido. Rails became arteries. Brahmaputra ferries at Pandu shouldered the flood, locomotives rolling onto barges that groaned under steel, while sappers marked river levels in grease pencil on bulkheads. Water turned to roadway. From railhead to front, Studebaker US-6 and Canadian built CMP 3rd tonners hauled forward, jeeps fanned out on tracks, and where wheels died the mule took over with 180 200 pounds of livelihood on its back. Muscle inherited momentum. Behind the rifle companies stood an army grown vast and methodical, the Indian Army expanding from some 200,000 in 1939 to over 2.5 million by 1945. Brigades raised trained, and marched through depots from Dehradun to Pune to the Arakan. Scale learned discipline. Gurkha battalions replenished from hill, recruiting lines through regimental centres. Nepalese volunteers sworn and drilled until their kit lay right, and their feet knew jungle pace by hour and mile. Manpower became method. Air turned the impossible into routine. RAF Dakota squadrons, 31 and 194 among them, and USAF troop carriers of Eastern Air Command dropped panniers and lifted casualties under monsoon ceilings. The sky supplied the ground. Operation Thursday had already proven the grammar. 1st Air Commando Group under Colonels Philip Cochrane and John Allison levered men and mules into Broadway, Choringhi, and other hacked strips with C-47s and Waco CG-4A gliders, then threaded Li-5 Sentinels through green tunnels to fetch the broken. Audacity became logistics. In April 1944, a Sikorsky YR-4B from the same Air Commandos flew the world's first combat helicopter rescue in Burma, skimming over teak to pluck stranded men from clearings the jungle tried to close. Innovation shortened distances. On the rivers, engineers fought their own battles. Storm boats bucking brown water at Nyongu and Maimu, assault crossings under knee mortar fire, and then the metallic hymn of Bailey Bridges clattering together panel by panel. Bridges turned attacks into advances. Sappers and miners drove piles by lantern light, then watched the first carriers and tanks nose across, as if testing a new promise, each crossing a bet placed with steel and sweat. Engineering paid in nerve. Medical discipline was industrial too. Mepocrine issued by schedule. Mosquito nets hung by rote, water chlorinated to taste like a swimming pool, and casualty chains rehearsed so a man could be on a table an hour after a Bren fell quiet. Health became a weapon. Rations arrived in compao, boxes, tea, bully beef, biscuits, matches, packed to drop and to last, their weight known to quartermasters the way a Bren's cadence is known to a gunner. Stomachs kept schedules. West African divisions, 81st and 82nd, proved another logistics theorems in Arakan and the Kaladan. Their head-load columns and machete cut trails carrying war along contours no lorry could read. Diverse methods met the same end. Signals layered the system. Wireless sets no. 18 and 22 chattered through rain to call Dakotas down, coloured smoke marked wind and drop, and panel codes on hacked clearings turned jungle into map reference. Information moved tonnage. Lend-Lease supplied the sinew. Trucks, jeeps, radios, aircraft, even locomotives, flowing into Indian depots that learned to issue as fast as they could count, so brigades could step off with the confidence that their shadow, the train behind them, was real. Allied industry wrote endurance into plans. The Lido Road, later Stillwell Road, pushed through to Meetkaina and beyond with bulldozers and sweat. A strategic line for China that nonetheless threw bridges, fuel, and reach onto the same map where Gurkhas cleaned corners in rain. Great projects cast local benefits. Fuel itself learned to flow unseen. Pipelines crept forward behind the advance. And drum dumps stacked like chessmen, covered miles of bunds and clearings so tank brigades and carriers didn't outrun their own future. Gasoline turned into time. In unit war diaries, logistics appears as plain ink. Drops successful. Bridge taking tanks. Mules arrived. But the meaning lived in the way companies could keep moving through weeks of rain without losing the edge on their blades. The mundane carried the miraculous. When Slim wrote that, the jungle is neutral. He was also writing about this machine. Rails to ferries to trucks to mules to men. Air wrapping it all. And engineers laying steel where water said no. Philosophy met schedule. By 1945 the avalanche of steel was not a roar so much as a hum. Dakotas in circuit. Bridges clacking, engines idling at dawn, porters and mules stepping off, and a quiet, curved blade resting in a scabbard, until the system delivered it to the last 10 yards. The jungle felt the weight of an organized silence. August 1945. Rain threads Rangoon's empty streets and beads on curved blades stowed in oilcloth, while battalion clerks tally names under punka fans, and the last shots fade into the jungle's damp breath. Silence weighs more than noise. The after-action reports are dry where the memories are wet, listing Mogong, Meiktila, Mandalay, and the Irrawaddy crossings with dates, companies, and casualties in lines that don't show mud, leeches, or the steadiness of hands. Paper cannot carry rain. Captured diaries speak of enemy infiltration at night and silent knife attacks, an understated confession that the jungle's promise of safety had been broken by men who moved like weather. Reputation became a weapon. General Slim's reminder. The jungle is neutral. Survived the campaign as both admonition and method, a sentence that taught armies to turn fear into drills and superstition into maps. Wisdom outlived the fight. In the London Gazette, the words sit spare and cold, with complete disregard for his own safety. Beneath names like Lieutenant Michael Almand and Rifleman Tol Bahadur Pun, citations that describe 30 yards of water and fire as if it were merely a task. Courage hides behind syntax. Calvert's signal, I claim we have taken Mogong, still feels like a fist unclenching when read in a file that smells of paper and mildew, a hard sentence earned by days that ground down men and steel alike. Victory kept its receipts. After the Biggles, the institutions reshaped themselves with treaties and timetables. The 1947 tripartite agreement, dividing the Gurkha regiments, 6th 1st, 3rd 4th, 5th 8th, 9th to India and 4 2nd, 6th, 7th, 10th to the British Brigade of Gurkhas, the 11th raised in the Indian Army. Service continued under new flags. Kukris crossed borders in kit bags, while traditions crossed in mess silver and memory, and the badge evolved into twin blades, beneath a crown or a numeral. A quiet heraldry for work none of its wearers boasted about. Symbols learned new homes. Museums keep the proof where the jungle cannot. The Gurkha Museum in Winchester, with blades and diaries under glass, Imperial War Museum files with field orders that still smell faintly of damp canvas, and plaques that turn names into stone. Memory needs rooms. On a plinth at Horse Guards Avenue in London, Sir Ralph Turner's words are cut deep. Bravest of the brave, most generous of the generous. Never had country more faithful friends than you. A civilian's gratitude hardened into public metal. Respect chose permanence. Post-war, the craft moved on without forgetting its first classrooms. Malaya's wet trails, Borneo's ridges, and later the Falklands peat where 127 Gurkhas trudged under sleet with the same quiet economy, that had once unmade outposts in Burma. Continuity is a habit. The kukri remained what it always had been, a tool first. Then a decision. Opening a path through rattan in the morning and finishing the last few feet of a fight in the afternoon, a blade that asked for no ceremony to do its work. Function-shaped legend. Veterans remembered the Bren's dependable rhythm, and the 2-inch mortar's soft plop, as clearly as the curved edge, because in truth the silence only mattered when the choreography behind it was exact. Myth bowed to method. Japanese soldiers who lived left notes as plain as their former confidence. 8 night we feared the enemy knives. One wrote, a line that closes like a door on an earlier belief that the jungle was theirs by right. Experience rewrote doctrine. In the end, the legacy sits inside small things, a taped sling swivel, a blackened sight, a hand on a shoulder in the dark, and in larger ones, like the way a whole army learned to move with care instead of awe beneath the teak canopy. Mastery learned humility, and when the last stories taper into photographs and steal behind glass, one lesson still rises with the breath of rain in leaves. That safety belongs to no one who forgets the silence, where the Gurkhas come with Kukris.